Okay, so let's get started. So James can probably join us soon. So, okay, hello everyone. Today's Thursday gathering, which is already 166. The first session happening is today's Thursday gathering is what you should know about establishing a business in Greater Bay Area. And in this session is organized by Bud and Bud. And today we welcome a wonderful speakers from across the world. And then I would like to pass it to Nobuyuki Ota, who's moderating this session. Nobu, the floor is all yours.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. And I'm going to share pages of document. And welcome to this session, the audience, and those who will be viewing it after we, record the session. So here's the agenda today. In 1 hour, we try to cover the basics and what's really happening in the Greater Bay Area, thanks to Brendenberg's lawyers who are really working there to help the companies. I'm doing now these opening remarks. My name is Nobu. I am a partner at Oxygy. Oxygy is a management consulting arm of Brendenberg, so we are kind of a brother or a cousin. And I'm based in Tokyo, so I am now like a TV show anchorman, trying to ask questions or introduce our colleague lawyers to talk about Greater Bay Area. And having said that, I'd like to quickly turn to my colleague, Ted Chwu, who's gonna talk a bit about introduction of Brendenberg himself and today's speakers. So Ted, thank you for joining forces together to make a Japanese audience or wherever they could be joining. Sometimes they could join from the States to talk about Greater Bay Area, etc. Can you introduce quickly Brendenberg, yourself and your colleagues?
Yes, thank you, Nobu. Arigato. And first, let me say welcome and also thank you on behalf of all of us at Brendenberg for this opportunity to talk to you all today. So a quick introduction about Brendenberg and then also myself and also the colleagues and the speakers on the webinar today. So Brendenberg, we are an international law firm. We first started off in London, England, back in 1846. And yes, there was a lawyer called Mr. Berg, and he was in partnership with another lawyer called Mr. Berg. And no, we're not worried about bird flu at all here. So we are now around 30 offices around the world, around 1,600 lawyers, and our footprint in the Greater China and APAC region. So we have currently offices in Hong Kong, Beijing, Shanghai. We will be starting an office in Shenzhen very, very soon. In fact, it would have been last year were it not for COVID-related issues. We also have offices in Singapore and Sydney in Australia and around the world, Middle East, Europe, and in the US. Our main focus is on helping clients who are in the technology areas and helping them to actually navigate through the risk of a very rapidly changing world, identifying opportunities, and also assisting clients in helping them to invest in them as well. So on the panel today, I have colleagues of mine joining from around the world. Actually, so first of all, Nobu-san, who is in Tokyo, so I wouldn't say we were cousins, we're more like beer buddies, actually, probably. Yep. Myself, I'm Ted Chwu. I'm Brendenberg's managing partner for our China operations, and I'm an IP lawyer engineer by training. With me here in the Hong Kong office today is my colleague, Ms. Anqi Sun, and she is in our intellectual property team, and she will be talking a bit about a case study in relating to a biotechnology company shortly. And then going around the Zoom window, you can see my colleague Philip, who is relaxing in our London office. So Philip is a corporate lawyer associate in the China team, but he is currently on secondment to our corporate colleagues in London. And joining us shortly, I believe held up by some technical difficulties, is our partner, James Gong. So James is based in our Beijing office. He's a corporate lawyer by training, but he also heavily specializes in the technology TMT sectors. And he will be giving us some comments and his views about some of the great shifts that are now going through the Chinese economy. Nobu, so that was all I had to say about the first part.
Thank you, Ted. And again, and thanks for Brendenberg colleagues for gathering, the teams together to talk about GBA and what's really happening today. So the next topic is, really just in general, what is GBA? And it's going to be covered by Ted, I assume. It's about, just a general information about Greater Bay Area. And to the audience, I may simply ask, do you know about GBA as one word, Greater Bay Area? I knew about Hong Kong myself. I knew about Shenzhen and in those areas. But this GBA seems to be the word to describe the region. And that's going to be explained by Ted. So about money or investment, technology there, talent, and regulatory changes. First of all, Ted, do you mind talking about what is GBA in general, and passing to you, Ted?
Thank you, Nobu. And perhaps we can move to the next slide. So just in very quick answer to your first question there, Nobu, when I first heard about GBA, which was a real project that came around in 2019, my first reaction as of somebody of my vintage was I was thinking about the Nintendo Game Boy Advance, but I quickly realized that wasn't what was being talked about on the news program. So GBA is an ambitious project that was launched in 2019 by the Chinese government. And on the map here, you will see, which is an expanded view of a small part of the southern part of China. So in essence, this is a project that links together 9 cities in the Guangdong province. So what you're seeing here is really the Guangdong province. Now, as you may know, China, in terms of its administration, is set between various levels. You have the countrywide level, state level, you have provincial levels, and you have municipal levels too. So the GBA is focusing on the southern coastal region, the province of Guangdong, and there are 9 cities within there which are part of this project, and also the 2 special administrative regions, Hong Kong and Macau. Now, of these major cities in the GBA region, I think probably most of us will have heard of the name Shenzhen by now, in addition to Hong Kong and Macau. So there are some other notable cities there. So for example, above the circle of Shenzhen, you see the word Dongguan. So Dongguan is a major manufacturing logistical center that has a lot of heavy machinery, manufacturing parts, OEM for all sorts of things around the world, from power tools to mobile phones and all that stuff. Other cities are probably less well known on the world stage, but nonetheless, they are all very, very big municipal regions. And to just give you some example of the relative size of the GBA and also the scope of the potential, Abu, would you mind going to the next slide? This is a chart comparing what is the GBA a region in terms of land mass, population, GDP, compared to other regions, which those on the call today may find some context with. The Tokyo Bay Area and also the US, the San Francisco Bay Area. So you'll see that in terms of size, it is roughly 50% larger than the metropolitan Tokyo Bay area and some 3 times the size of the San Francisco Bay Area, to a first order of approximation. A very large population size and a GDP figure there of something which is approximate to the Tokyo Bay Area, which is also, an order of magnitude larger than the US Bay Area. The port cities being a major manufacturing export region have a huge amount of freight, so they receive 8 million tons, and the port of Shenzhen, which is one of the cities in the GBA project, that alone is the 4th largest port in the mainland China. So it's a very big logistical hub too. Passenger air traffic. This is obviously figures taking from 2019 when it was a different world. So 202 million. So,
Too bad, yeah.
That's right. And then annual port container throughput. So TEUs is the 20-foot equivalent unit standard container port. So there you see at a very rough level snapshot of the size, the landmass, the consumer base, and also what they kind of do. Would you mind going back up a slide to the previous? So just some more comments around the GBA. So as part of this ambitious project, each of the 9 cities and the 2 special administrative regions, they all have a role to play in the GBA project. Essentially, at a very high level, what this is meant to do is to reduce the amount of red tape and also inter-city difficulties in trade, movement of capital, both in terms of financial capital, human capital. And as part of that, there are some subspecial projects. So for example, in the city of Qianhai, there is a new pilot zone in the Qianhai region of Shenzhen. This has a rather cumbersome name, which is the Qianhai Shenzhen Hong Kong Modern Service Industry Cooperation Zone. But in essence, what it does is to set up a region with a very preferential tax treatment for investing companies in eligible industry, mainly in IT, high-tech services, creative industry, structural services, and a very much reduced red tape. Now, one special feature of this new Shanghai Free Trade Zone is that foreign-owned enterprises registered there can choose to have a foreign law as the governing law when they enter into agreements. So, for example, Hong Kong law, Japanese law, or whatever. This is somewhat special because usually Chinese courts would only recognize foreign law when there is a substantial foreign element, whereas in this free trade zone, the agreements that companies enter into in the zone itself can also be governed by that, by those foreign laws. Now, as I myself and also many of our colleagues are based in Hong Kong, I just wanted to take a moment to say a few reasons why companies, when they're looking to have exposure to the GBA or to invest in there, may choose to use Hong Kong as a gateway to the entire GBA region. So in Hong Kong, we have a very well understood legal system. The business climate here now is very well understood, transparent, legal. We also have a very simplified tax and also financial red tape, a regulatory system. There is no hindrances on the flow of capital or finance. These things, I think some of my other colleagues will also touch upon later. There is also the agreement called CEPA, which is called the Coastal Economic Partnership Agreement, which was entered into between Hong Kong and the mainland, I think back in 2003, which also reduces trade tariffs and barriers for movement of goods, personnel, services between Hong Kong and the mainland China. So as a place for companies to use as a base for gaining exposure into the GBA as a base of their operations, Hong Kong here, very well understood system, strong IP law protection here too, would be a very good choice. Just looking at the time, Nobu, maybe I will wrap up here and pass back to you now.
Thank you for mindful about the time, Ted. That was a good introduction together with where, first of all, GBA just like Ted mentioned, he misunderstood that the Nintendo Game Boy Advanced, but now it's really getting attention. And then, having, Ted, thank you very much for just a general introduction. And I think we would be going to talk about what are the unique business trends or benefits and schemes for foreign investors. In Ted's general description, I think there was some attractiveness for a foreign investor or startup company coming into this region to enjoy some benefits and special conditions. And having said that, assuming James hasn't joined yet, Angie, if you don't mind,
sorry,
I think
I'm on.
Okay, James. Welcome. Sorry, I didn't see your face, so I was just assuming that you were still like caught in the traffic, etc. So, James, could you, I think you're talking about some technology shift or new data privacy or some regulatory aspect of what's happening in this GBA area. What's the attractiveness or some changes that's worth an investor should know or startup? I'm interested in coming into China in general, where to start. Can you briefly talk about technology trend shift and around data area based on your experiences? Thank you.
Thank you. And speaking of the Greater Bay Area, that some of you might not be familiar with, but if I mention the name of Huawei, Tencent, ZTE, DJI, that might ring some bells. The thing is that for the GBA, the key difference is that these companies are the Chinese private companies. They have the Chinese, they own the Chinese indigenous technologies that have been developed, and that is encouraged by the Chinese government, but it's also been developed by the entrepreneurs themselves with their private, with their own efforts. So that is very important to know, because the Greater Bay Area is it has a relatively shorter history, but it's a hotbed for creativity, for originality, for also entrepreneurship, and this technology and this trend of indigenous technology has been developed by the companies, private companies, is spearheaded by companies like Huawei. For instance, in the battle of 5G and even in the 6G telecommunications, the Chinese companies led by Huawei is now having more. It's getting, it's getting ahead of its competitors.
Mm-hmm. This is a dynamic remote environment feature.
Excuse me. This very stubborn cleaning guy insisting on cleaning my room. So,
so you can clean. Don't clean your data, and if you can.
Yes. So just pick up where I left. So this is perhaps for the first time that the technology leaders are growing from China, especially in the Greater Bay Area. So this is a very important trend, and the Greater Bay Area is the place where hosts a substantial number of these companies. So that is why I've got to say about the Greater Bay Area. So if you are really interested in investing in perhaps next generation companies, in meeting the entrepreneurs, and also you're just curious about what the Chinese tech companies is capable of, I think the Greater Bay Area will be your first choice when you visit China. And in terms of, and along with the shift of technologies from technology trained indigenous technologies. It also comes with the explosion of the amount of data being sort of processed and controlled by Chinese companies, especially by the tech companies, internet companies. So the Chinese government has now put in data protection on top of their legislative agenda, and they have published the two milestone regulation, the laws in China, the data protection law and the personal information protection law and the data security law. One focuses on the protection of personal information and also the individual's rights to their personal information. And the DSL and the other one focuses on the security side of the data. So that means that all the companies in China, now they will have to take actions to make sure that they will protect the interests of the individuals. They will have to put some restrictions on their own processing activities. At the same time, they have to be responsible for the security of the data, and also be responsible for the national for national security and protect the data from being used in a way that is against the national security and national interests. So that means that for all the companies in China, they have to take action, but also for companies investing in China, you have to be careful with these laws, because it could affect the capability of transferring data outside of China, and also it could in a way restrict your capability of transferring technologies from China. I think although having said that, don't be scared about by that, because it's not like a prohibition of that. But the point is that you just need to pay attention to the compliance and also the new requirements under the new laws. And here, if you are interested in investing in the Greater Bay Area, or if you have already invested in the Greater Bay Area and you have data being processed in China, or having data from China being processed in Japan, or having technologies and data being transferred outside of China to Japan, then you need to be mindful of these new laws and also take actions to comply with it. And for the commercial, I'm here to help. Feel free to give us a ring or drop us a line. We're very happy to give you some whatever information or assistance you would need to make sure that you will be prepared for any sort of upcoming legislation's enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Right on time. And I think what you covered are basically two things, which we might come back later, as the audience may have some questions, or I may have some, clarification points on behalf of the audience. But I think you mentioned some advancement of technologies and getting concentration, kind of a concentration into this GB area, or let's say shift to a GBA area in general. And also the regulatory requirements or legislation is mindful about making sure about the data protection and security. And therefore, for some of the companies, this is something they have to be mindful. But let's say, things are getting kind of a order matching to, other trends in on the planet, etc. So I think that's what you pretty much, try to communicate with the audience. And having said that, let's just quickly move around today's panel. And the second is Anchi, who is going to talk about some biotech startup experiences and environment of life science or healthcare industry or sector. And if I may pass the baton to Anchi, and while James can think about what are some of the points that you could come back later, Anchi, would you mind talking about what is your experience in a biotech startup and some new schemes in the GBA area?
Yes, sure. 皆さん、こんにちは。本日は皆さんに GBA におけるライフサイエンスの発展についてお話す機会をいただき、本当に嬉しいです。 just wanted to do the greetings in Japanese because I did spend some time learning it. But
Thanks. Yeah, that's an extra point on Game Boy.
Yeah, but I'm afraid I cannot do the whole presentation in Japanese.
That's
so
fine.
I have
That's
to
fine.
switch to English from now on. So there have been a few recent developments in the life sciences sector in the GBA, which I believe will be of interest to Japanese investors and entrepreneurs. So the first thing I want to talk about is there's this recent GBA policy called, it's quite a cumbersome name again, it's called the Work Plan for the Innovative Development of Regulations of Drugs and Medical Devices in the Greater Bay Area. So to make it simpler, so in essence, this policy allows the use of drugs and medical devices that have already been approved and used in Hong Kong and Macau to be applied to patients in certain clinics in the Greater Bay Area. So why is this interesting? This is because, generally speaking, the time required to approve a new drug or new medical device in Hong Kong is much shorter compared to mainland China if this drug or medical device has already got approval in certain foreign markets, including Japan. So briefly, on the kind of drug registration process in Hong Kong, so in most cases, it's like normally there's no requirement for local clinical studies to be conducted in Hong Kong to prove efficacy or tolerability. Instead, the regulatory authority in Hong Kong here will look at like the information and the data from previous regulatory submission and in the countries where the drug has already been registered, overseas markets. So for drugs containing a new chemical or new biological entity, approvals in 2 of a list of designated countries are required. And that list includes US, UK, various EU countries, and most importantly, Japan. So for medical devices, there is no mandatory registration process in Hong Kong, although there is a voluntary registration scheme called the MDACS, which is operated by the Department of Health in Hong Kong. So what does this mean? So in Hong Kong, you do not have to register with MDACS before you are legally allowed to sell your device on the market. But it's generally recommended to register with the MDACS because healthcare professionals will feel much more comfortable recommending and prescribing your device if it's registered. And public hospitals and any government procurement will prefer the registered devices over non-registered devices. And for the medical device registration process, the most time-consuming part is the conformity assessment. So the conformity assessment is to check and verify this device conforms with the accepted standards of safety and performance. But if for Hong Kong, if this device has completed the conformity assessment in one of the reference markets, including US and the EU, and most importantly, Japan, then there's no need to perform fresh new conformity assessment. So in short, the registration process will be speeded up massively if the device is already registered in Japan. So this sort of like ready recognition and appreciation of foreign approvals and foreign clinical data by the Hong Kong authorities is very different to the attitude adopted by the mainland Chinese regulatory authority. So the mainland China regulatory authority, NMPA, has generally been quite reluctant to like accept or take into consideration foreign approvals and foreign clinical studies when they approve new drugs or devices. So generally, unless it's like an orphan drug or drugs that's addressing life-threatening disease with no available therapy at all in China, then they will usually require like the lengthy process of having to do a local phase 3 clinical trial and for drugs and a certain local clinical studies for devices as well. So that's why historically foreign approved innovative therapies have historically been quite slow in accessing the mainland Chinese market. And this policy would help increase the accessibility of innovative therapies that have been approved abroad, for example, in Japan, to the mainland Chinese patients. And manufacturers of the drugs or devices that address these these like innovative therapies will have the access to this like huge mainland Chinese market. So I think that's something that will be of potential interest to Japanese entrepreneurs and investors in the biotech sector. And so the second thing I want to talk about is a matter I recently advised on involving a Hong Kong startup company and a Hong Kong subsidiary of a Japanese conglomerate. So I advised on their research collaboration and IP cross-licensing between the parties. And so without going to the details of this matter itself, I think the point worth noting from this transaction is that this Japanese subsidiary can benefit and obtain grants and funding from the Hong Kong government by virtue of being incorporated in Hong Kong. Although it's a subsidiary of a Japanese company, but that does not affect its eligibility for applying for these sorts of government grants. So this leads me to talk a little bit about the Hong Kong government's Innovation and Technology Fund. So this is a big fund that's backed by the government with the aim to increase innovation, productivity, and competitiveness of the Hong Kong economy. And so far, more than 24 billion Hong Kong dollars, which is roughly equivalent to 345 billion Japanese yen, have been invested. And more than half of those were invested in high-tech industries like IT, electronics, and biotechnology, whereas the rest of the fund will mainly spent to like encourage adoption of this innovative technology in traditional industries. And so most of these, so there are like various different funding programs with different emphasis under this like overarching innovation fund. And most of those funding programs for the private companies do not impose any restriction on the nationalities of the shareholder, of the investor, or the employees. So for as long as this company that's applying for this funding is incorporated and legally incorporated and registered in Hong Kong, then they will be able to benefit from like this initiative by the Hong Kong government. So that's so if you're a Japanese investor is considering like incorporating in Hong Kong, then yeah, but just registering company here, you can still benefit from the Hong Kong government funding. It doesn't matter whether you're Japanese, Chinese, or from anywhere else in the world. So yeah, that's all I want to say about life sciences today.
That sounds great. And as you mentioned, not just Japanese companies, but biotech startups having a huge benefit by coming into this region. And obviously, we want to know, as long as you know how much Japanese companies are trying to come into GBA and etc. So we're going to come back to you on that point too later. But thanks, Anchi, for covering biotech case and attractiveness of GBA region. And thank you. And having said that, well, we talk about GBA, but the next topic is introduction of Hong Kong, or reintroduction of Hong Kong as a financial center. And yes, GBA, as explained by Ted, is a kind of a greater Bay Area. But we are talking about Hong Kong because of its specific attractiveness that's still shining in the area. And Philip, if you don't mind, can you briefly talk about Hong Kong's function or feature today?
Absolutely. Hi everyone. So as everyone may know, Hong Kong has been and has always been Asia's leading financial center. And indeed, in this new GBA concept, Hong Kong would definitely remain the financial center within the GBA. Actually, the financial sector alone accounts for about 21% of our GDP. In terms of the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, which I regularly advise clients for listing, on the main board and the GEM board, it ranks 5th worldwide in terms of market capitalization, in terms of global stock exchanges. Indeed, the funds raised through IPOs, in terms of that, last year, Hong Kong came second, only after NASDAQ, actually. And the amounts raised was approximately $51 billion. Every year, we have a lot of newcomers to the market, including the mainland Chinese behemoths, including last year, there was JD.com, JD Health, and NetEase. I mean, obviously, Shanghai and Shenzhen have greatly expanded their offerings, in the past few years, but certainly from the major Chinese players, Hong Kong is still the place to go. I mean, local companies only make up now about 24% of the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, as opposed to 69% in 2000. And so, from this, you could see how in this GBA concept and over the years, Hong Kong has increased in importance as the gateway for mainland Chinese companies to access foreign capital. We, as Ted mentioned earlier, we also remain the perfect venue for international, financial community due to the common law, due to like the free flow of the yuan as compared to currency controls in the mainland. And so this places Hong Kong as a key market, both for Chinese companies and overseas investors trying to access China. Now, from a startup perspective, Hong Kong has also got a very vibrant investment outlook. I mean, right now, Hong Kong, there are many family offices which have set up in Hong Kong and who are actively actually investing in various ventures, both in China and in other countries. And certainly yesterday, I was pitching to a major family office regarding potential opportunities. And so both for a startup, when you look at it, right, initially, if you're seeking funding, especially for international funding, Hong Kong would be the perfect choice. And as your business grows and as the founders and the other shareholders look for an exit, the Hong Kong Stock Exchange would be, the perfect venue to do so. Additionally, latching on what Anchi said earlier, actually, in terms of recent trend, Hong Kong has become a major biotech hub due to the reform of our listing rules in 2018. So prior to 2018, before the reforms, under the traditional listing route, for a company to list on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, you would need to fulfill either a profits test, a market cap revenue cash flow test, or a market cap revenue test. Now, I wouldn't bore you guys too much about the figures, but certainly from January 2022 onwards, for the first 2 financial years, you'd need to have at least 45 million Hong Kong dollars in profit. And for the last financial year, you need at least 35 million Hong Kong dollars in profit. So what that means is that for a lot of pre-revenue biotech companies, under the old listing rules, they couldn't actually list in Hong Kong because they don't yet have revenue. But then in terms of these companies, they are going through the phases of which they would require the most capital to further develop their product and their business. And so Hong Kong has reformed their listing rules, allowing for pre-revenue biotech companies to list subject to the fulfillment of certain conditions. And additionally, a supporting ecosystem has developed, including, through university programs, government funding, and biotech finance professionals. And Hong Kong is now home to over 250 biotech businesses. And certainly in mainland China, especially in the Greater Bay Area, biotech is also a key area of focus for a lot of startups. And so with the construction of this new sort of ecosystem, Hong Kong is the perfect place to access funding, for listing, and for many other activities. Indeed, in terms of figures, after the reforms, over 75 healthcare companies have listed on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, raising 231 billion Hong Kong dollars. And so in essence, Hong Kong is now only second to NASDAQ in terms of biotech listings. Now, so you might be wondering, if it's a pre-revenue biotech company, what conditions do you have to fulfill? Traditionally, the Hong Kong Stock Exchange isn't run upon the same premise or the same theories as New York. Certainly in the US, it's primarily a disclosure-based system, but in Hong Kong, the regulators actually play a very active role in protecting investors and to vet as to which companies should be allowed into the market. So in terms of listing applicants, which are pre-revenue biotech companies, it must have at least developed one core product beyond the concept stage. And a core product is a biotech product required by laws to be evaluated and approved by a competent authority. And currently, the stock exchange recognizes three authorities: the authorities in mainland China, the US FDA, and the authority in the EU. An applicant must have primarily been engaged in research and development for the core products for a minimum of 12 months prior to listing. And listing must be done to raise further funds for further research and development. It must have registered patents and IP in relation to its core product. It must have a pipeline for the core product, and it must have received meaningful third-party investment from sophisticated investors at least 6 months before the listing. Now, this is to ensure that the product that the applicant is developing has market recognition. There are further rules about how much this may be, and there are further rules about what constitutes a sophisticated investor, which I could go into more detail if any of you are interested later on. Now, in terms of the initial market capitalization, it has to be at least 1.5 billion Hong Kong dollars, with at least 25% held by the public upon listing. It must have at least 2 financial years of operations developing this product, and it must ensure that it has sufficient working capital to cover at least 125% of the costs for the next 12 months. So these, as you can see, these conditions are instituted to ensure that despite being a pre-revenue biotech company, investors can have some certainty as to the potential and as to the technology that the company is developing.
That
So
really reassures that the Hong Kong still holds a place in terms of investment and some all those guidelines and foundations to make sure the investors can feel safe to do all those activities. And then that's giving some special condition for a selected sector like biotech and etc. Am I summarizing fair enough about what you said, Philip?
absolutely, that's a very good summary. So in essence, the Hong Kong Stock Exchange is playing a key role in vetting which biotech companies should be allowed into the market and which ones shouldn't. And bring it back, just to conclude, as you could see, with Hong Kong's role as a major financial hub in the region, with the copious amounts of money that, are available for funding, and with our world-class stock exchange, Hong Kong still plays an integral role in the development of the Greater Bay Area.
Thank you, Philip. That really assured me again also that Hong Kong's a key strategic role, and why Hong Kong could play that role is because the technology is coming, some talents are coming, and legislation are getting sorted out, etc. And that's really empowering the attractiveness of a Greater Bay Area. Ted, after hearing the 3 colleagues of yours, I was really curious again to know, so what is the prospect kind of a future of GBAs? GBAs started, first of all, now the name Greater Bay Area is like GBA, and I think that name would be increasing its popularity due to tech shift, some legislation sorted out, some key sector like biotech, and then financial hub function still remains in Hong Kong. What do you think about the future of a GBA in general and attractiveness for Japanese companies?
Thank you, Nobu-san. So as you may guess, I am very optimistic. We are very bullish about the prospects, both in terms of growth there for the economy in general, opportunities for companies to actually go there to set up operations there, and also for investors to be exposed to some of the growth there. If we take a step back and we rewind, say, around 30 years ago, Shenzhen was still largely a fairly sleepy fishing village, whereas now it's home to some of the.
I remember the pictures.
Right, so it definitely didn't. Shenzhen definitely did not look like that, and I remember the first time that I went there, which was around just over 20 years ago now, and it was, you could just drive for miles and miles in very flat land. Now it is hugely developed, and as others have mentioned, it's home to some of the biggest technology names and the companies in the world. So Huawei, Tencent, DJI, so on. But what they've done is those anchor tenants, if like, have lifted up the whole infrastructure and the ecosystem for innovation technology, and it's really empowered a whole generation of youngsters to see that as being their opportunity. It's their time to do something, start up a company, to work with us to come up developing some new products, services. It's a constantly evolving city with a very pragmatic, very can-do attitude. People there think, well, if I want something and I don't have that thing, I should do something to earn some money to go and be able to afford it. It's a very transparent system there. And for anyone looking to have a exposure to that action or that energy, the way that the GBA has been set up means that you will find support amongst the different dotted ecosystems around the whole GBA region. Hong Kong being a key player, one of the 3 largest financial markets in the world after New York, London.
Thanks for summarizing, Ted. And one of the keywords that we would like to discuss a bit is about ecosystem, not just the cities, but going back to James's point, technology. And when you talk about technology, it's about the key talent and how they are forming this, system of meeting each other, talking about their technologies, providing some support or getting some funds, or all those organic ecosystem would be probably one of attractiveness or key feature that's really happening today. But I think I want to stop here just for a moment to get any questions that we haven't mentioned in our explanation to the audience. So I think I would like to pause for 10 seconds just to get any open questions from the floor. And if we may hear them, I will direct it to one of the colleagues. And if we may not hear that, based on what we have presented, I've got a couple of a question that I want to ask about GBA. So that's how I may spend the rest of the time. So I stop talking for 10 seconds, and the audience, Mr. and Mrs. or Ms. audience, if you have anything that you would like to directly ask a question to one of the presenters, verbally or in the chat window, you are welcome to do it. And to prove it, Lisa from Venture Cafe is just putting some chat messages in the window that I can see. You can use chat or unmute yourself if you have any questions, etc. So I shut my mouth for 10 seconds. I may stop sharing the document. Okay, looks like no direct chat question or a direct kind of a question to the presenter. So what I would like to ask after hearing the 4 colleagues' presentation is, first I want to go back to James, this ecosystem concept surrounding around technology ecosystem, supporting, supplying some services ecosystem, and obviously what Philip talked about, the financial ecosystem, or in the field of a biotech, there must be scientists and labo technicians and equipment. All those things form a kind of an ecosystem. But James, do you want to talk a bit about ecosystem in GBA from your perspective?
Yes. Of course, there is this ecosystem that will support the rapid growth of entrepreneurs. And I think that will require, firstly, the investors, which provides the funds, and also the entrepreneurs, who's able to lead the creative projects to add value. There needs to be a government that actually provides the environment that could help the companies to grow, and also there needs to be talent, which means that either you have great higher education institutions, or you can attract talent to come to your place and help to join you and help you to build up your dream. I think in terms of investments, now that China has, over the past 10 years, has developed a huge venture capital and private equity industry, with a number of huge Chinese PE funds that have, has sort of staged on the not only in China but also at the global stage. Companies like Hill House, which has like a portfolios of hundreds of billions of dollars, and also we have already seen the foreign PE funds like like the KKR and etc. They have all invested in China, have also made their fortune. They have also invested in some of the most famous companies in China, and which proves that it is the place that can give you the returns, and it is the place that the investment can actually see the reliable benefits coming from the growth of the company. And also there is, just for information, in Shenzhen there is also a stock exchange, and also across the border in Hong Kong we have an international financial center with the the stock exchange that often has the records IPOs amount on an annual basis. So we have the PE fund, the VC industry. We also have the stock exchanges where they can list the companies. So this is a good combination for the industry. As I said, there's the entrepreneur.
Thank you. So that what you meant is almost like technology attracts talents, and if technology and talents attract each other, there's let's say financial players in general coming to support to grow the business, which is proven by Philip's presentation. And now that we have about 4 minutes to go, Philip, do you want to say quickly about how James described from the financial ecosystem perspective? And I want to touch on Anchi. I'm curious because this attractive condition, you should be seeing more and more biotech coming into GBA area. But have you seen any Japanese move? And in the end, Ted, thanks for putting this together. But if you want to just conclude quickly, we have about 1 minute per each. But Philip, so what about the financial ecosystem in GBA? And of course, Hong Kong as a hub.
I mean, just to latch on to what James says, and what I said earlier, I certainly would agree. Certainly in Hong Kong, there's a very vibrant PE VC community doing a lot of investments into China. And I've personally acted for some prominent PE VC houses actually doing such investments. In terms of IPOs, the majority of IPOs are coming from mainland China. A lot are coming from the Greater Bay Area, especially with biotech. We've had 75 listings since the rules were changed in 2018. And so, to sum up, I definitely think that in terms of, the future, Hong Kong will play a more integral role in companies trying to access foreign funding, and especially with the Sino-American relations, a lot of the deals that were going to NASDAQ would now be going to Hong Kong. And certainly, with a lot of the bankers that I usually deal with, they're saying that they're seeing a new record of deals in the pipeline to list on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. So, to sum up, these are very exciting times.
That's interesting perspective. Yeah, it's almost like an ecosystem of together with other markets too, sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. Okay, now I got the permission from organizer that we could learn a few minutes, but that few minutes is a definite end. And having said that, Anchi can, talk about, I asked about Japan just because, we are doing this for Venture Cafe in Tokyo, but anything noteworthy about Japanese biotech or anything you missed out? And then pass to Ted to close this session. And having said that, Anchi, would you mind?
Yeah, so from my personal work experience, like I've not seen that much direct kind of like setting up a new company in Hong Kong to like in a biotech sector, but it's kind of more indirect involvement where like a Japanese company may kind of invest like or obtain some shareholding in a like local startup or mainland startup that is kind of aiming for the 18A listing. And because there's such a hot market for biotech listing at the moment and the valuation is generally quite high, so that's kind of how they could benefit from this trend. That's just from my limited personal experience.
Thanks, Sanchi. That sure sounds like an attractive place to be there, but in a strategic way. So that's why companies need your advice. So Ted, having all of the three colleagues touched upon some their interests or their perspectives, would you mind concluding this session by summarizing and some message to a Japanese or even American or European audience who could be viewing this session?
Sure. And then first of all, let me just say again, thank you for this opportunity here. We get asked by many clients who say that they get asked by their business people where some of the next billion customers will be coming from. So a large part of that will be coming from this part of the world, from the Asia Pac region, particularly the Southeast Asian regions. And a lot of that growth of that expansion is going to be coming from tech-driven enterprises. And certainly in the Asian hemisphere that we're in here, a lot of the epicenter or the engine room of that growth and innovation will be coming out from the GBA region, from the Shenzhen part of China. Having said that, Hong Kong itself is a very transparent, it's a very well-known a city. The environment here for doing business is very well understood. We have a very good ecosystem of all the various professional support services that companies would need, investors would need. It's a very small place too, so it needs to have trade with others to survive. It's a very welcoming place for anyone looking to come to Hong Kong, set up here, and many Japanese companies have been here before. We work with, we have worked and we carry on working with them for very long established, very fruitful relationships, and we welcome any opportunity to help others who are now thinking to do the same thing.
Thanks, Ted. Having said that, this is the end of the session. I thank my colleagues and passing the baton to Lisa from Venture Cafe. If you are still listening in, I think you just sent a chat message to invite audience and participants to go to networking space.